Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, An Evening Among Friends. The little town of Market Densham was not known for intrigue, nor indeed for anything more scandalous than the occasional dispute at the parish council over allotments or lampposts. It was a quiet English town, with narrow streets, a church that chimed punctually on the hour, and a marketplace where one could still purchase fresh bread, flowers, and gossip in equal measure. Yet it was here, on a mild September evening, that a seemingly ordinary gathering of friends would set into motion a chain of events neither they, nor Hercule Poirot, who happened by chance to be in their midst, would ever forget. Vesuvio's Pizzeria had opened only 2 years earlier, and it was already regarded as something of a local treasure. Its owner, Mr. Vesuvio, was an Italian émigré with an extravagant moustache, an endless stock of anecdotes, and a proud philosophy that pizza, properly prepared, was an affair of art rather than appetite. His walls were hung with rustic paintings of Naples, his shelves laden with bottles of olive oil and jars of marinated artichokes, and his tables were draped with cheerful red and white cloths. The whole establishment smelled of wood-fired dough, fresh basil, and melting cheese. Into this scene came 6 friends, a party well known in the town for their weekly habit of dining out together. George Radcliffe, a large, ruddy-faced man of 45, fond of laughter and food in equal measure. He carried his success in property speculation like a badge of pride, and his voice boomed across any room he entered. Clara Mason, a quiet woman of delicate build and sharper eyes than most suspected. She was a school teacher, known for her neat handwriting and her stern but fair manner with her pupils. Edward Blake, a man of brooding countenance and few words, who had once tried his hand at business alongside George, only to see his ventures fail disastrously. Marion Hughes, George's cousin, whose genteel manner concealed a quick temper and a long-standing grievance about a disputed inheritance. Henry Foster, the joker of the group, ever ready with a pun or a prank, though more than one person had noted a nervous edge to his laughter. Sylvia Crane, lively, charming, and dressed in a style that suggested she liked to be noticed. She worked with a charitable foundation and had a reputation for persuasive eloquence when collecting donations. They filed in cheerfully, though in the way of old friends their cheer was tinged with the familiarity of quarrels past. Marion complained about the draft near the door, Edward muttered something about the price of imported wine, and George waved his hand grandly, declaring he would order the largest pizza they had, with everything on it. Their waiter, a slim young man named Paolo, placed menus before them, but George brushed his aside. "No need for that, my good fellow. We'll have a Vesuvio special, 3 bottles of the house red, and, for myself, a bottle of sparkling lemonade. I'm driving tonight." "Very good, signore," Paolo said with a bow, and vanished into the kitchen. The group settled into conversation. At first, the talk was light. Clara spoke of her pupils' antics, Marion recounted her cat's misadventures, and Henry told a story about slipping on a banana skin in the high street that was so absurd even Edward cracked a smile. But beneath the laughter, Poirot, sitting 2 tables away, enjoying a solitary supper of margherita pizza with olives, could sense undercurrents. He was, as ever, attuned to the psychology of those around him, and though he did not yet suspect the drama to come, his little grey cells were already alert. For George's booming voice often carried fragments, "That business deal was mine, Blake, and you know it. The will was clear enough, Marion, you had no claim. Don't frown so, Clara, you know I only tease." Each remark, light on the surface, bore an edge beneath. Poirot, who knew well the way of human passions, smiled faintly to himself. Where there is friendship, there is also rivalry. Where there is laughter, there may also be jealousy. Soon Paolo returned with their drinks. The glasses clinked merrily as Henry made a mock toast to the longest friendship in England, unbroken even by George's dreadful snoring. George guffawed and reached eagerly for the lemonade bottle. Paolo placed it on the table with a flourish, and George poured himself a generous measure, the fizz bubbling up cheerfully. It was then Poirot noticed a small detail, one of the 1,000 trifles to which his attention was drawn by instinct. A napkin, folded neatly a moment ago, was now missing from George's place. He thought little of it, perhaps it had slipped to the floor. Yet his eyes, sharp as any hawk's, lingered for a second too long. The friends continued to chatter. Sylvia teased George about his waistline, Clara reminded him gently of his cholesterol, and Henry joked that if George were ever to collapse, they would have to roll him out like a barrel. Everyone laughed. George raised his glass high. To friendship, he declared, and to pizza. He took a hearty sip. A moment later, the laughter turned to alarm. George's face drained of colour. He coughed, gasped, and clutched at his chest, his glass falling and shattering upon the tiled floor. The friends leapt to their feet in panic. "George!" cried Marian, rushing to his side. "Good heavens!" Clara exclaimed, fumbling for her handbag. "Some water, quickly!" Henry shouted, his voice higher pitched than usual. The pizzeria was thrown into chaos. Chairs scraped, Paolo shouted in Italian for help, and Mr. Vesuvio himself hurried from the kitchen, flour dusting his apron. George sank back against his chair, groaning, his hand still pressed to his chest. And through it all, Hercule Poirot sat quite still. His eyes, calm and calculating, swept over the scene, the broken glass, the half-empty bottle of lemonade, the faces of the friends pale with shock, and the faint tremor in Sylvia's hand as she clutched at the table. It lasted only moments. An ambulance was summoned, and with assistance George was carried out, still breathing but gravely unwell. His friends, shaken and murmuring, followed after, leaving the table in disarray. Poirot dabbed his lips with his napkin and rose. There was, he felt, no accident here. It was not in his nature to leap to conclusions, yet the sense of design, of something carefully arranged, was unmistakable. He approached the abandoned table, his polished shoes clicking softly on the tiles. He bent down and, with delicate precision, picked up the missing napkin from beneath George's chair. It was faintly damp, as though it had been used to shield some action from view. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Mais oui," he murmured softly to himself. "Here, perhaps, we have the beginning of a most curious little drama." And thus, while George fought for breath and his friends reeled in shock, Hercule Poirot, modest, precise, and unfailingly observant, took the first step towards uncovering a mystery that would soon entangle them all. Chapter 2: A Disturbance at the Table. The atmosphere of Vesuvio's pizzeria, once filled with the warmth of laughter and the scent of oregano, had shifted in an instant. The music of clinking glasses and the cheerful scrape of cutlery were replaced by gasps, cries, and hurried footsteps. George Radcliffe, the very centre of the group's joviality, now lay half-collapsed in his chair, his complexion grey, his hand clutching his chest as though an invisible hand had struck him down. "George! George, speak to us!" Marian Hughes cried, kneeling beside him. Her voice, usually cool and composed, broke into a desperate tremor. Henry Foster darted left and right like a man uncertain of his own limbs. "Water! We need water, quickly!" He seized a jug from a nearby table, slopping liquid across the cloth as he poured it into a glass with trembling hands. He pressed it against George's lips, but George coughed violently, choking on the attempt. "Stop, you'll drown him!" Clara Mason snapped, her schoolmistress authority piercing through the confusion. She prized the glass from Henry's hand with surprising strength. Her eyes were wide with concern, yet her movements were crisp, deliberate, as though she had been rehearsing for such an emergency all her life. Sylvia Crane, elegant even in panic, fluttered about uselessly. "It's only a feint," she insisted, her voice rising in pitch as if to persuade herself. "He's eaten too much, that's all. You know George, always overindulging. It's nothing serious." Yet her eyes betrayed her words, darting from the spilled glass to the half-empty bottle of sparkling lemonade on the table. Edward Blake stood apart, arms folded, his expression dark. "Serious enough, I'd say. That wasn't indigestion." His voice was low, but it cut through the air like a knife. Within moments, the scene became chaos. Chairs toppled, cutlery clattered to the floor, and Paolo the waiter dashed towards the kitchen, calling frantically for assistance. From behind the counter, Mr. Vesuvio emerged, his white apron covered in flour, his moustache quivering with alarm. "Madonna mia! What has happened?" he cried, hurrying to George's side. Clara answered briskly, "He collapsed. We must telephone for an ambulance at once." The word ambulance spread a hush across the room, as diners from other tables craned their necks, whispering. Mr. Vesuvio vanished back into the kitchen, and moments later, the shrill ring of a telephone broke the air. George's condition wavered. He was not unconscious, but his eyes fluttered weakly. A groan escaped him, the sound raw and terrible in the otherwise civilized atmosphere of the little restaurant. Marion dabbed his forehead with her napkin, her hand shaking as she whispered, "You'll be all right, cousin. You'll be all right." It was at this point that Hercule Poirot, who until now had observed the commotion in silence, rose from his seat. He smoothed his immaculate moustache, adjusted the cuffs of his perfectly pressed suit, and approached the table with measured steps. "Pardon, mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice calm, almost soothing. "If you will permit, I am Hercule Poirot." Clara looked up sharply. "The detective?" Poirot inclined his head modestly. "At your service." "I could not help but observe, there has been a sudden incident, n'est-ce pas? Perhaps I may be of some assistance until the proper authorities arrive." Henry let out a nervous laugh that faltered halfway. "Poirot? The great detective himself? Well, if anyone can make sense of this madness." Sylvia clutched at his arm. "Oh, don't be ridiculous. There's nothing to make sense of. George has simply eaten too much too quickly. It happens all the time." Poirot's eyes flicked to her, noting the strain in her tone, the way her hand trembled as she reached for her glass but thought better of it. He did not comment. Instead, he turned his attention to George. "Sir, can you hear me?" Poirot asked gently, leaning close. George stirred, his lips moving faintly. A single word emerged, "bitter." His eyes closed again, his face tightening with pain. "Bitter," Poirot repeated softly. He straightened, his expression thoughtful. His gaze drifted to the shattered glass on the floor, the puddle of lemonade, and the bottle standing innocently on the table. He reached out and lifted it delicately, as though it were an artifact in a museum. Holding it to the light, he studied the contents with the same precision he might give a priceless jewel. "Curious," he murmured. "Very curious indeed." The ambulance siren soon wailed in the distance. When the paramedics entered, brisk and efficient, they moved George onto a stretcher. Questions were asked: what had he eaten, what had he drunk, had he any history of illness? The friends gave conflicting answers, their voices overlapping in a clamour of panic. The only constant was the mention of the sparkling lemonade. As George was carried out, still groaning but alive, the friends clustered together, pale and shaken. "This is dreadful," Marion whispered. "It's more than dreadful," Edward muttered grimly. "It's deliberate." His words hung in the air like smoke. Everyone turned to stare at him. "Don't be absurd," Sylvia snapped. "You think someone tried to harm George? Here? In public?" among his own friends. She gave a brittle laugh. It's preposterous. But Poirot raised a hand, silencing them with the quiet authority of a conductor halting an orchestra. Miss Amos, he said, let us not leap to conclusions. But let us not dismiss them either. Something is not as it should be. He looked from face to face, lingering for a heartbeat on each expression, the wide-eyed Clara, the frowning Edward, the trembling Sylvia, the defensive Marian, and the jittery Henry. His little grey cells, already awakened, whirred silently. Until we know more, he continued, it would be wise for none of you to leave. The police will wish to speak with you. In the meantime, you may answer one question for me. Which of you poured the drink for Monsieur Radcliffe? There was a pause. Then Clara said, he poured it himself. No, Marian contradicted. I distinctly recall someone else holding the bottle. Wasn't it Henry? Sylvia asked, her voice too sharp, as though eager to divert suspicion. Henry blustered, me? Nonsense. I was telling my joke about the banana skin. Their voices rose, each contradicting the other. Poirot observed quietly, his moustache twitching ever so slightly as though he suppressed a smile. Interesting, he said at last, when silence returned. So, no one poured it. The bottle emptied itself, perhaps? No, Miss Amos, there is confusion here, and confusion is the enemy of truth. But truth, she is always present, waiting to be seen. He set the bottle back upon the table with careful precision, as though it were evidence in a court of law. We shall wait for the authorities. In the meantime, I suggest calm. Panic serves no one. And remember, details, however small, may prove most revealing. As if on cue, a waiter bent to pick up the fallen napkin near George's chair. Poirot's hand shot out with surprising swiftness. Leave it, if you please, he said softly. It may be of interest. The waiter looked puzzled, but obeyed. Poirot stooped, retrieving the cloth himself. Holding it delicately, he noted the faint dampness along one edge, a detail that seemed to escape everyone else. To the friends, it was a forgotten scrap. To Poirot, it was the whisper of a story waiting to be told. And so, while George was whisked away to the hospital and the friends fretted in anxious speculation, Hercule Poirot stood calm and composed, his mind already weaving together the first fragile threads of a mystery. Chapter 3, Enter Poirot. When at last the ambulance's wail faded into the night and the clatter of panic subsided, Vesuvio's pizzeria stood in an uneasy hush. The other diners murmured among themselves, half scandalized and half thrilled at the drama they had witnessed. The scent of baked dough and tomato, once comforting, now seemed cloying, almost sinister. At the center of it all remained George Radcliffe's 5 companions, pale and shaken, clustered around the table as though they might draw warmth from one another's fear. Into this scene, Hercule Poirot stepped with quiet authority. He was a small man, but his presence commanded the room more completely than George's booming laughter ever had. His immaculate suit, his patent leather shoes polished to a mirror shine, and above all his perfectly waxed moustache gave him the air of a figure cut from precision itself. Where others trembled, Poirot radiated calm. Miss Amos, he began, forgive me that I intrude upon your evening. Yet it appears that what has occurred is not the ordinary fainting, n'est-ce pas? The poor monsieur, he is gravely ill. Until we are certain, it would be wise to assume that something most unnatural has entered into his drink. The words fell like stones. Clara gasped softly, Marian paled, Henry fidgeted with his tie. Sylvia gave a sharp, nervous laugh. Surely you exaggerate, Monsieur Poirot. George is fond of theatrics, you know how he likes to be the center of attention. Poirot regarded her gravely. To be the center of attention, yes. To collapse, gasping, clutching at his chest? Non, madam. That is a role no man desires to play. Edward Blake's dark eyes narrowed. Then you believe someone tampered with his drink? I believe, Monsieur, Poirot said, lifting a finger, that it is possible. And when it is possible, we must not dismiss it. The doctor at the hospital will say soon enough whether he has been poisoned. But already my little grey cells, they whisper to me that there is purpose behind this drama. The group fell silent. Each face bore a different shade of unease, Marian's lips pressed tight as if holding back words, Henry's eyes darting nervously, Clara folding and unfolding her napkin with mechanical precision, Sylvia smiling too brightly, and Edward scowling as though already wronged. Poirot, meanwhile, moved with deliberate care. He examined the table. The bottle of sparkling lemonade stood half empty, innocent in appearance, beads of condensation trickling down its side. The shattered glass on the floor had been swept aside, but Poirot's eyes noted every fragment, every droplet of liquid seeping into the cloth. He bent and picked up the damp napkin once more, holding it between thumb and forefinger as if it were the most delicate clue in the world. You see, my friends, he said softly, one takes a drink, but another prepares it. This napkin, why is it damp? Why is it placed beneath the chair, not neatly upon the table? A trifle, you may think, but in trifles the truth hides. Henry gave a nervous chuckle. Perhaps George simply dropped it. Poirot's gaze swept to him. Perhaps. And yet, did you see him drop it? No, Henry admitted, colouring. Just so. Poirot smiled faintly. We do not assume. We observe. He placed the napkin carefully upon the table, then drew up a chair. Now, before the police arrive, permit me to ask a few little questions. Nothing serious, no? Only that I may understand the order of events. He looked at each in turn. First, when the bottle was opened, who touched it? There was a pause. Clara spoke first, her voice precise. George called for the lemonade. Paolo brought it. George reached for it himself, I think. You think, madam? Oh, you know. Poirot asked gently. I am not entirely sure, Clara admitted, frowning. There was conversation. I may have been distracted. Distracted by what? Poirot asked. She hesitated. By Henry, perhaps. He was making one of his jokes. Henry shifted in his seat. Yes, I was. A silly thing about a banana skin. Everyone laughed. Everyone? Poirot inquired softly. Well, perhaps not everyone. Edward wasn't laughing. Edward gave a short, humorless laugh of his own. I had no time for jokes. I was watching George. And for the record, I did see someone else handle the bottle. But I won't say who until I'm certain. All eyes turned to him. Sylvia arched an eyebrow. How convenient. Cast suspicion without clarity. Very noble of you, Edward. His face darkened, but Poirot raised a hand. Patience, mademoiselle. We do not quarrel, we reflect. Monsieur Blake, you say you saw someone. That is useful. We shall return to it. Poirot turned his gaze to Sylvia, whose smile had grown fixed. And you, madam? What do you recall? She shrugged lightly, though her hands twisted the stem of her glass. I recall George being greedy, as always. He poured a great deal for himself. He drank too quickly, and naturally it upset him. There is no mystery in that. Yet you were the first to say it was nothing serious, Poirot observed. Why, I wonder. When others feared for his life, you assured them it was indigestion. Her smile faltered. I only meant to calm them. Panic never helps. Indeed, said Poirot mildly, though his eyes lingered on her a moment longer. Finally, he addressed Marian. And you, madam? Marian's face was pale, her eyes bright with anger barely contained. I saw nothing. I only know that my cousin collapsed, and if he dies, it will be a scandal upon us all. Poirot inclined his head. It will be worse than scandal, madam. It will be tragedy. But let us hope he recovers. In the meantime, we ask not who gains, not yet. We ask only, who poured the drink. Again, the group fell to bickering. Each contradicted the other, voices rising, fingers pointing, alibis tangled. Poirot sat serenely, his hand steepled, watching, listening. He noted how Henry avoided Edward's eye, how Clara wrung her napkin to threads, how Marian's hands clenched in fury, how Sylvia's smile never reached her eyes. At last, he spoke, his voice low but commanding. So it is agreed, no one poured the drink. Ah, Miss Amos, you are 5 witnesses and yet you tell me nothing. Very well. The police will ask the same. Perhaps then, memory will improve. He rose, smoothing his jacket. For myself, I observe only this, 1 glass was poisoned, not the bottle entire. It was prepared in silence, under cover of distraction. And one among you knows who did it. Sylvia gave another sharp laugh. You speak as if it is certain. Poirot's moustache twitched. Madam, when the great Hercule Poirot speaks, he speaks with certainty. Already, I begin to see the outline. The details, they will come. But make no mistake, this was no accident. It was design. At that, a chill passed through the group. And in the silence that followed, the clatter of a distant dish from the kitchen sounded like the crack of a pistol. Chapter 4, Suspicions Take Shape. The group remained huddled at their table long after the ambulance had gone. Mr. Vesuvio, in a nervous attempt at courtesy, brought them coffee on the house, though not one of them touched it. The cups stood cooling on the red and white cloth as the friends exchanged uneasy glances. Outside, the street lamps cast long shadows on the cobblestones, and the pizzeria's lively chatter had dulled to a low murmur, for the other patrons were eager but fearful of what they might overhear. Poirot, however, seemed wholly at ease. He sipped his own coffee with delicate precision, as though nothing pleased him more than an espresso savoured at precisely the right temperature. He let the silence stretch until it tightened around them like a noose. At last, he set his cup down and looked from face to face. Miss Amos, he said softly, I fear I must speak plainly. If what happened to Monsieur Radcliffe was not the natural attack of the heart, then someone at this table sought to do him harm. Such things do not occur by chance. Sylvia let out a sharp gasp. You cannot mean one of us. Who else, madam? The bottle was opened here, before your eyes. No stranger approached your table. If poison was placed in his glass, it was by a hand that sat among you. The words settled like stones in water. Each of them shifted uneasily, and yet none spoke. Poirot folded his hands neatly before him. Do not be alarmed, he continued. The truth, she is patient. It comes, little by little. Already, I have observed enough to say this, Monsieur Radcliffe was not without his enemies. Perhaps you will enlighten me further. He turned first to Edward Blake, whose expression had hardened like stone. Monsieur Blake, you and Monsieur Radcliffe were once associates in business, were you not? Edward's jaw clenched. We were. Until he cheated me. Clara frowned. Edward. No, let him hear it, Edward said fiercely. His eyes flashed at Poirot. We invested together, years ago. Property, land. I trusted him. And when the deal came through, he left me with nothing. Nothing but debts and shame. Marian's lips curled. You lost money because you were careless, Edward. George simply seized the opportunity. Opportunity? Edward barked a bitter laugh. Is that what you call betrayal? He ruined me. I've lived in his shadow ever since. Poirot nodded gravely. A most unhappy tale. And yet, monsieur, you came here tonight as his guest. Edward's gaze flicked away. He insisted. Said bygones should be bygones. I accepted, though I do not forgive. Poirot inclined his head but did not press further. Instead, he turned to Marian. And you, madam? You are cousin to Monsieur Radcliffe, yes? I am, Marian said stiffly. And there is talk of an inheritance? Poirot asked gently. Her face flushed. There was. My aunt left an estate that by right should have been divided. George saw to it that it was not. He claimed the will was clear. I say it was manipulated. Clara interjected, Marian, this isn't the time. It is always the time. Marian snapped. That man has stolen from me, laughed at me, and treated me as though I were a foolish child. Perhaps I did not wish him dead, but do not ask me to pretend I loved him. Poirot studied her calmly. You are honest, madam. I admire that. He turned next to Clara Mason, whose folded hands trembled slightly in her lap. Mademoiselle, you are the quiet one. But even the quiet, they have their secrets. Tell me, what is your quarrel with Monsieur Radcliffe? Clara looked startled. Quarrel? None. He teases me sometimes, but I bear it with good humour. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, but humour wears thin. A man who teases does not always know where to stop. A schoolmistress, she demands respect, yes? And to be mocked, always, in front of others, it wounds the pride. And pride, mademoiselle, it is a dangerous thing. Clara coloured deeply. Perhaps. But wounded pride is hardly cause for poison. None, Poirot agreed mildly. Not cause, but the seed of resentment. It grows quietly, until it bears fruit. Clara fell silent, her gaze lowered. Poirot allowed a pause, then looked to Henry Foster. The man shifted uncomfortably, his fingers tapping the table in nervous rhythm. And you, monsieur, the merry jester of the group. Always with the laugh, the joke. Yet laughter can conceal unease. Tell me, why is it you were so quick to thrust the glass of water upon your friend, when others held back? Henry stammered. I only wanted to help. Or to appear helpful. Poirot asked softly. Henry's face reddened. Are you accusing me? I accuse no one, Poirot replied evenly. I merely observe. Your nerves betray you, monsieur. You tremble, you laugh too loudly. One might think you fear discovery. Henry swallowed hard, his hands retreating into his lap. Finally, Poirot turned his gaze to Sylvia. She met it with a brittle smile. And you, madam, he said, you were most insistent that nothing serious had occurred. Even while the others panicked, you spoke of indigestion. Why so certain? I was trying to calm them, she said quickly. I thought, I hoped, it was nothing. Or, Poirot murmured, you feared that panic would draw attention too soon. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. You twist everything. George and I, yes, we disagreed at times, but I've no reason to harm him. Poirot inclined his head. Perhaps not. Yet you work for a charity, I hear. And Monsieur Radcliffe, he was to expose some mismanagement of funds, was he not? Sylvia's composure faltered. Who told you that? Poirot smiled faintly. No one. But my little grey cells, they are seldom mistaken. Money, inheritance, pride, betrayal, all are motives. Each of you has cause, however small, to resent Monsieur Radcliffe. And resentment, Miss Amos, is the seed of crime. The group erupted at once, denials, protests, accusations. Edward accused Marian of venom, Marian flung back words of greed, Clara begged for calm, Henry muttered that he was being framed, Sylvia declared her innocence with indignant fervour. Poirot sat serenely amid the storm, like a conductor watching his orchestra descend into cacophony. At last, he lifted a hand, and the babble stilled. Miss Amos, he said softly, the truth, she is here at this table. Already, I begin to see her shadow. But the police will arrive soon, and you must each prepare to speak plainly. Remember, lies are fragile things. They crumble when touched. He rose, smoothing his jacket, his eyes gleaming with quiet certainty. For now, I leave you with this thought, George Radcliffe was not poisoned by chance. He was poisoned by design. And the hand that sought to kill him, it is among you. The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. And in that silence, each of the 5 friends wondered, did Poirot's eyes linger longest on them? Chapter 5, Clues in Plain Sight. The police arrived soon after, led by Inspector Graves, a solid, square-jawed man with little patience for subtleties. He questioned the friends briskly, scribbling notes while they stammered conflicting accounts. But though Graves was efficient, it was clear he welcomed Poirot's presence. In Market Densham, the name of Hercule Poirot carried a weight greater than any badge. "Take your time, sir," the inspector said, gesturing towards the table. "You've the finer eye for detail." Poirot bowed slightly. "It is most kind. Indeed, it is in the detail that the truth resides. Let us look, then, with the eyes open and the mind alert." He approached the table once more, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. The friends watched in uneasy silence as he examined their abandoned feast. The great pizza lay half-eaten, its edges curling where the cheese had cooled. Plates were scattered, forks abandoned mid-bite. But Poirot cared nothing for food. His gaze lingered instead on the bottle of sparkling lemonade and the cluster of glasses around it. He lifted the bottle delicately, holding it to the light. The level of liquid sat just above halfway, a faint line of bubbles clinging to the inside. He tilted it slowly, his eyes narrowing. "You see, Miss Amos," he said softly, "the bottle itself is not poisoned. If it were, all who drank would be ill. And yet only Monsieur Radcliffe suffers. Ergo, the poison was placed not in the bottle, but in a single glass." Inspector Graves frowned. "But how can you be sure?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Because I trust the evidence of my little grey cells. Look, 5 glasses untouched, 1 broken on the floor. The fragments, they tell me a story." He bent, gathering the largest shard with his handkerchief. He sniffed it lightly, then nodded. "There is residue. Faint, but present. Something bitter, not natural to lemonade. You recall what Monsieur Radcliffe said before he lost consciousness?" "Bitter," Clara whispered. "Just so." Poirot set the shard carefully aside. "It is his testimony, small but vital." He moved next to the intact glasses. One by one, he inspected them, holding them to the light. On several, smudged fingerprints blurred the surface. Poirot noted their placement with a keen eye, here, the grip of a hand, there, the careless touch of a finger. "Do you see?" he murmured. "This glass, handled from the side. This one, grasped firmly at the base. But George's glass, it was held differently, as if by one who sought to shield it from the view of others." Henry shifted in his seat. "Anyone might have touched it." "None, monsieur," Poirot replied smoothly. "Anyone may touch, But how they touch, that is different. It speaks of intent. One who grips naturally leaves prints in common places. One who pours discreetly leaves them elsewhere. And here, He indicated a faint smudge at the rim of George's broken glass. See how the mark crosses? It is the trace of a thumb, pressed hard, as if steadying the vessel while something was dropped within. Inspector Graves whistled. You mean to say someone dosed the drink right here at the table? Where else, mon ami? The bottle was sealed until brought by the waiter. The opportunity arose when glasses were being filled amidst the distraction of laughter and conversation. A clever hand, concealed by the fold of a napkin, slips in the powder, and voila. He turned, gesturing towards the damp napkin he had retrieved earlier. And what do we find? A cloth, slightly wet, used perhaps to hide the act, then cast aside beneath the chair. A small thing, easily missed, except by Hercule Poirot. The friends exchanged uneasy glances. Clara clasped her hands tightly, Edward's lips pressed into a grim line. Sylvia adjusted her necklace with fingers that trembled. Poirot, however, was serene. He seated himself once more, folding his hands. So, Miss Amos, we arrive at certainty. George Radcliffe was poisoned not by chance, but by deliberate hand. The question becomes not whether, but who. Marian spoke sharply. You cannot expect us to know. We were all talking, laughing, we hardly noticed. Poirot inclined his head. Precisely. That was the moment chosen. Amid laughter, one is least observant. Yet there is always one who watches more closely than they appear. He let the words hang, watching their faces carefully. Henry cleared his throat nervously. Well, if the prints matter so much, why not test them? That would prove who touched what. Poirot smiled gently. In time, monsieur, the police may do so. But fingerprints, they are useful, yet they do not reveal intent. 1,000 prints may be left in innocence. What matters is the psychology. Who had cause, who had courage, who had calmness of hand? That is the true clue. Inspector Graves scribbled notes, but Poirot's eyes never left the friends. He was watching for the smallest twitch, the slightest betrayal. You see, he continued, our culprit is clever. They did not pour poison for all, only for George. That means their aim was not chaos but precision. They wished his death to appear natural, an illness of the heart, perhaps. No scandal, no suspicion. A private revenge enacted in public silence. That is not the act of one who rages openly. It is the act of one who calculates. Sylvia shifted uncomfortably. You make it sound monstrous. Poirot bowed his head slightly. It is monstrous, madam. To seek to kill with secrecy is more monstrous than to strike with a knife. At least with a knife, one shows one's hand. Here, he gestured to the glass fragments, one hides, and hopes never to be discovered. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint ticking of the restaurant clock. Poirot let it linger, knowing silence reveals as much as speech. Henry's restless fidgeting grew frantic, Clara's gaze remained fixed upon her folded hands, Marian glared as though daring anyone to accuse her, Edward brooded darkly, his thoughts concealed, and Sylvia, though still smiling faintly, kept touching her throat, as though she could not quite breathe. Poirot, satisfied, leaned back. The evidence, she is small but clear. One glass, not the bottle. A thumbprint in an unusual place. A napkin dampened and discarded. These are trifles, but from trifles, Hercule Poirot builds his case. And soon, Miss Amos, I will know whose hand prepared that glass. Inspector Graves cleared his throat. And when you do, sir, we'll have them. Poirot gave his most delicate smile. Indeed, mon ami. But patience, always patience. A hasty accusation, it is like an undercooked soufflé, it collapses at once. Non, we allow the crime to ripen. Then we pluck it. He stood, brushing an invisible speck from his immaculate sleeve. For now, I advise you all to remain at hand. The police will require statements. And I advise you further, do not think you can deceive Hercule Poirot. Already, the truth begins to whisper. And she whispers loudly enough for me to hear. The friends exchanged anxious glances once more. The clues lay upon the table, plain for all to see. Yet only Poirot could read their language, and already he was translating it into the music of guilt. Chapter 6: Red Herrings Abound. Inspector Graves was brisk, practical, and very English. He had little patience for Poirot's talk of psychology and shadows. For Graves, a packet of tablets found in a man's pocket spoke louder than any little grey cells. Well, this settles it, he said firmly, dropping the small paper packet upon the table. These were in Foster's coat. Crushed tablets. Bitter to taste. Looks like poison to me. All I swung towards Henry Foster. He gave a strangled gasp. That's mine. They're aspirin. I swear I carry them for headaches. Headaches, eh? Graves arched an eyebrow. Convenient excuse. Henry's face reddened. It's the truth. Ask Clara, she knows I've had them for years. I've even given her 1 or 2 when she's had migraines. Clara spoke hesitantly. It's true. He has. But, she stopped, glancing nervously at Poirot. But? Graves pressed. But, Clara continued reluctantly, these do look odd. They're crushed, not whole. Precisely. Graves snapped. Prepared to be slipped into a drink, no doubt. Henry leapt to his feet, his hands shaking. No. I crushed them myself, out of habit. They dissolve faster in water that way. I can't swallow pills easily. Marion sniffed disdainfully. A likely story. Crushing pills to make them easier to swallow? Who's ever heard of such nonsense? Henry's voice cracked. It's the truth. You must believe me. Poirot, who had been silent, now raised a hand. His voice was calm, but it carried more weight than Graves' bark. Sit down, monsieur. And you, Inspector, do not leap so quickly. Aspirin is bitter, yes. But aspirin is not poison. And our poor Monsieur Radcliffe, he lives. If it were truly a lethal poison, would he not be dead by now? Graves frowned. Perhaps he wasn't given enough. Poirot shook his head gently. Non, mon ami. The criminal who poisons does not measure timidly. If they sought his death, they would not risk a mere stomach ache. No, these tablets are but a red herring. A clue that leads only to confusion. Henry slumped back in his chair, tears of relief in his eyes. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Do not thank me yet, Monsieur, Poirot replied. Your nerves betray you. Guilt or innocence, I cannot yet say. But I tell you this, these tablets are not the weapon of the crime. The others exchanged uneasy looks. For a moment, Henry seemed absolved. Yet suspicion, once planted, is hard to uproot. Clara's eyes lingered on him doubtfully, Marion muttered under her breath, and Edward shook his head darkly. Edward himself became the next target of attention. Graves turned to him with a frown. And as for you, Mr. Blake, your quarrel with Radcliffe is public knowledge. You admit you've reason enough to want him gone. Edward's lips curled into a bitter smile. Reason enough, yes. But opportunity? No more than the rest of them. Don't play coy, Marion snapped. You despised George for years. We all know it. Edward's voice rose. Despised, yes. Enough to kill? No. I may have hated him, but murder? That's a step I'd never take. Big words, Henry muttered bitterly. But I saw you watching him closely all night. You hardly took your eyes off him. Edward rounded on him. Because I knew something was bound to happen. George always made enemies. I half expected a scene. Sylvia laughed, brittle and sharp. So now you claim to be a prophet as well as a victim? Really, Edward, your self-righteousness is exhausting. His eyes narrowed. And what about you, Sylvia? You were the first to dismiss it as indigestion. Why so eager to convince us it was nothing? Sylvia's smile stiffened. I was trying to calm everyone. Unlike you, I don't enjoy hysteria. The quarrel escalated. Voices overlapped, accusations flew, each pointing at another. Graves shouted for order, but Poirot merely sat, observing, his expression serene. At last he rose, tapping the table with one finger. His voice cut through the noise like a bell. Enough! Quarrels, they bring heat but no light. Let us examine calmly. He paced slowly, his small shoes gleaming under the lamplight. First, the poison was delivered in a single glass. Second, the act was shielded, perhaps by the missing napkin. Third, the culprit is precise, calculating, and unhurried. Such a person does not panic. Such a person does not shout. Such a person thinks always of appearances. His gaze drifted over them one by one. Monsieur Foster, you tremble too much. You are too careless to poison. Mademoiselle Clara, you are sharp, yes, but too honest, your pride would reveal you at once. Monsieur Blake, your hatred is too loud, too obvious, a poisoner hides, they do not announce. Madame Marion, you are fiery, passionate, poison is not your weapon, it is too slow for your temper. He paused. And then, there is Madame Sylvia. Sylvia stiffened. Why single me out? Poirot's eyes were calm, but sharp as needles. Because of psychology. When others panicked, you dismissed. When others cried, you smiled. That is not natural. It is the behavior of one who knows more than they ought. Her lips trembled. You accuse me without proof. I do not accuse, Poirot said gently. I observe. The proof, it will come. But psychology, psychology, she speaks now. And she says, here is a woman who conceals. Sylvia rose to her feet, her eyes flashing. You twist everything. George has always teased me, belittled me, yes, he found fault with the accounts of the charity I manage. But that does not make me a murderer. The words hung heavy. For the first time, the others saw motive in her denial. Clara whispered, Sylvia, Marion sneered, charity, indeed. More like theft. Edward muttered, I knew it. She's too polished by half. Sylvia's face burnt with fury. You're all against me. You want someone to blame, and I'm convenient. But I tell you, I did nothing. Poirot raised a hand. Perhaps. But mark this, the poisoner is calm, precise, silent. And of all of you, only one fits that mask. Graves leaned forward. Are you saying she did it? Poirot shook his head. I say only this, the truth is close. One more step, and she will reveal herself. Until then, Inspector, do not arrest. The net must be drawn at the right moment, or the fish escapes. The inspector grumbled but obeyed. Sylvia sat trembling, her eyes glittering with unshed tears, while the others whispered among themselves. Poirot resumed his seat, serene as ever. "We are close, Miss Amos. The clues, they are here. The psychology, she is clear. Tomorrow, perhaps, the truth will stand revealed. Tonight, we wait, and we watch." The tension at the table was palpable. Every word, every glance, every twitch of a hand seemed laden with suspicion. The friends sat in silence, bound together by fear and doubt, while Poirot sat apart, master of the storm, waiting for the final gust of truth. Chapter 7. Poirot observes the psyche. The group was weary. Hours had passed since George Radcliffe's collapse, and though word had come from the hospital that he was now stable, the friends remained in a state of unease. They lingered at Vesuvio's Pizzeria under the watchful eye of Inspector Graves, their faces pale, their voices subdued. Outside, the lamps flickered in the foggy night, and within, the once cheerful restaurant had taken on the air of a courtroom. Poirot, however, was not weary. Seated neatly at the head of the table as though presiding over a tribunal, he looked perfectly composed. His moustache gleamed, his eyes shone with quiet intensity, and his manner was one of absolute control. "Miss Amos," he began softly, "the physical clues, they speak clearly. Yet the glass, the napkin, the fingerprints, they tell us only that a hand tampered with the drink. They do not tell us whose hand. For that, we must listen not to the objects but to the hearts and minds of those present. Psychology, it is the true science of Hercule Poirot." Henry Foster gave a nervous laugh. "Psychology? I thought you were a detective, not a doctor." Poirot smiled faintly. "I am both, monsieur. A doctor for the ills of the human soul. And here, I fear, the malady is grave." He allowed his gaze to sweep across the group. Clara, tense and silent, Edward, grim and brooding, Marion, sharp-eyed and resentful, Sylvia, restless yet smiling. Poirot lingered on each face as though reading a book. "Consider," he said, "the nature of the attack. Not the pistol fired in anger, not the knife thrust in passion. None. Here we have a quiet poison slipped into a glass, intended to kill unnoticed, disguised as indigestion. This is not the act of one who seeks drama. It is the act of one who seeks silence. Ask yourselves, Miss Amos, who among you fears scandal most? Who would desire death, yet dread attention?" Marion bristled. "You imply it was me? Because I guard my family's name." Poirot inclined his head. "You resent Monsieur Radcliffe, yes. But your anger is open, fiery, quick to speak. Would you have the patience for such a crime? Perhaps not. Poison, it is for the patient, the calculating." Edward leaned forward. "Then look no further. I had the patience, and I had cause. He cheated me out of my fortune. Do you need a greater reason?" Poirot regarded him calmly. "Indeed, monsieur, you have cause. Yet you protest too readily. The guilty, they hide, the innocent, they declare themselves wicked. You remind me of a man who stands in the rain and shouts, 'See, I am soaked,' hoping none will notice the umbrella tucked beneath his coat. You resent Radcliffe, yes, but your resentment is too loud. Too theatrical." Edward flashed darkly, but fell silent. Poirot turned to Henry, whose hands fidgeted upon the table. "And you, monsieur? You tremble, you jest, you laugh too quickly. To the careless eye, you are guilty of something. But guilt of what? Not, I think, of attempted murder. None, you are guilty only of fear, the fear that suspicion will fall upon you. Tell me, why did you carry a packet of tablets in your coat?" Henry stammered. "They're aspirin. For headaches." Graves had already tested them, they were indeed harmless. Poirot nodded gently. "Precisely. A red herring, as the English say. You feared the discovery would condemn you, and so your nerves betrayed you. But you, I think, are not our poisoner. Clara stirred, her voice tight. You look at all of us as if we're criminals. But perhaps George's collapse was natural after all. He's not a young man. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, mademoiselle, but why do you insist upon this? You, who are precise, observant, a teacher by trade, you know better. You saw the bitterness in his face. You heard his word. And yet you deny. Clara's cheeks coloured. Because I cannot bear to think one of us, one of my friends, capable of such evil. Poirot bowed his head slightly. A noble sentiment. But alas, denial blinds the eyes. Still, your denial is the denial of innocence, not guilt. The tension at the table grew thick. Poirot let the silence stretch before turning, at last, to Sylvia. And you, madam, he said quietly, you intrigue me most. Sylvia's smile wavered. Me? Why? Because when George collapsed, you alone said it was nothing. While others cried out, you insisted it was indigestion. That was curious. I was trying to calm them, she replied quickly. Panic helps no one. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Perhaps. Yet your insistence was not the calm of reassurance, it was the eagerness of dismissal. You sought to erase the event, to persuade others it did not matter. That, madam, is very telling. Sylvia's fingers tightened on the stem of her glass. You twist everything, Monsieur Poirot. George is my friend. Why should I want him harmed? Poirot's voice softened. Because, perhaps, he threatened you. George was no angel. He laughed, he teased, he betrayed in business and in blood. But what of money, eh? It is always about money. You work with a charity, do you not? And George, he was a man who liked to boast. Did he perhaps discover something he was not meant to see? Sylvia's face paled. That's absurd. How could you know? She broke off, biting her lip. Ah, Poirot murmured. So there is something to know. She looked around quickly, realizing she had spoken too much. The others stared at her in shock, suspicion flickering in their eyes. Edward muttered, I knew it. Too smooth by half. Marian said coldly, charity, indeed. More like theft. Clara whispered, Sylvia, tell us it isn't true. Sylvia snapped, it isn't. George exaggerated, he misunderstood. I've done nothing wrong. Poirot raised a finger. No, madam. Not nothing. You have done something. What precisely, we shall see. But this much is clear, you are not the woman who faints at blood. You are the woman who conceals. And concealment, it is cousin to guilt. Sylvia's composure cracked. She pushed back her chair, standing abruptly. This is intolerable. You cannot sit there accusing me without proof. Poirot remained seated, perfectly calm. Sit, madam. The proof, she will come. You may struggle, but she is patient. And when she arrives, she will point her finger not at one, but at only one. That is the beauty of truth, she does not scatter her light. She shines, direct and clear. Sylvia stood frozen for a moment, breathing hard, before sinking slowly back into her seat. The room was utterly silent. Even the clatter of dishes from the kitchen had ceased, as though the restaurant itself listened to Poirot's words. Poirot folded his hands neatly. So, Miss Amos, we near the end. The motives, they are many, revenge, inheritance, pride, fear of exposure. The means, they are clear, a powder, a glass, a napkin. But the psychology, that is where the truth lies. The guilty, they reveal themselves not in what they do, but in what they deny. He rose, bowing slightly. Tomorrow, when I have spoken further with the doctors and examined the evidence once more, I shall reveal all. Until then, I advise you, sleep, if you can. But I think, perhaps, sleep will not come easily tonight. The friend stared at him, stricken. For though Poirot had accused no one outright, each felt the shadow of his words fall upon them. Each wondered if, when the morning came, his finger would point directly at them. And only Poirot, serene and precise, knew the answer. Chapter 8. The Revelation. The following evening, the friends assembled once more at Vesuvio's Pizzeria. It was Inspector Graves who summoned them, but it was Hercule Poirot who presided. The restaurant, usually lively with chatter and clatter, had been closed for the occasion. Mr. Vesuvio, wringing his hands nervously, kept to the kitchen, peering out occasionally like a stagehand watching a drama unfold. The 6 chairs around the long table were occupied by Clara, Edward, Marion, Henry, Sylvia, and at the head, Poirot himself. Inspector Graves stood nearby, arms folded, watchful but deferential. The only absence was George Radcliffe, who lay recovering at the hospital, his life preserved but his presence sorely missed. Poirot looked around the table, his small frame composed, his moustache immaculate, his eyes shining with a peculiar satisfaction. He tapped the table lightly with one finger. "Miss Amos," he began, "you have waited in fear and suspicion. Each of you has wondered if the hand of guilt pointed towards you. Tonight, you shall know. Tonight, the truth, she will speak." He paused, letting silence thicken. Then he continued, his tone precise, deliberate. "Let us recall the facts. George Radcliffe drank from a single glass of sparkling lemonade. Moments later, he fell ill, complaining of bitterness. The bottle itself was clean. Therefore, the poison was in the glass, not the bottle. Someone prepared it carefully, shielding the act with a napkin, then discarding that napkin beneath his chair. Voila, the mechanism of the crime. The friend shifted uneasily. Henry fiddled with his tie, Marion's lips pressed into a thin line, Sylvia sat stiff and pale. But who, Poirot asked softly, had reason to attempt such a deed? He turned to Edward. "Monsieur Blake, you had cause, yes. Years ago, Radcliffe cheated you in business. Your bitterness is plain for all to see. Yet precisely because it is plain, I dismiss you. Poison is subtle, secretive. You, monsieur, are not." Edward scowled, but said nothing. Poirot looked next to Marion. "Madame Hughes, you too had cause. The inheritance you believe stolen. Yet you are fiery, passionate. Poison is for the cold-blooded, not for the quick-tempered. You would strike openly, not hide behind a glass." Marion flushed, but gave a short nod. "To you, Mademoiselle Clara," Poirot said, his gaze gentle. "You suffered George's teasing, and pride may wound. But you are honest to a fault. You could not conceal such an act without betraying yourself. Non, you too I dismiss." Clara's shoulders loosened as though she had been holding her breath. Poirot's eyes slid to Henry. "And you, the merry jester, always laughing, always trembling. The crushed tablets in your pocket, aspirin, no more. Your nerves condemned you more than your deeds. You feared suspicion, and so suspicion came. But not guilt. You are too careless, too anxious to execute such precision." Henry let out a shaky laugh of relief. At last, Poirot's gaze rested on Sylvia. He did not speak immediately. He let the silence build, the weight of his attention settling upon her like a stone upon fragile glass. "Madame Crane," he said softly. "Here the pieces converge. You alone insisted from the first that George's collapse was nothing, that it was indigestion, theatrics. You sought not to calm but to dismiss, to erase the evidence before it was examined. Why? Because you knew what others did not, that poison was the cause. Sylvia's eyes flashed. That is absurd. I wanted to prevent panic. Poirot shook his head gently. Non, madam. It was more than that. For George Radcliffe had discovered something. Your accounts at the charity you manage, there were irregularities, yes? Funds misplaced, monies diverted. He threatened to expose you. An exposure would mean ruin. Sylvia's lips trembled. You can prove nothing. But I can, Poirot replied calmly. George confided in a friend. He told Inspector Graves, only days ago, that he intended to confront you. That is why you acted swiftly. A little powder slipped into his glass at the moment of distraction. It was elegant, it was discreet. It was meant to be fatal. And when he cried out that it was bitter, you were the first to deny it. Because you feared the word would betray you. Sylvia rose abruptly, her chair clattering back. Lies. All lies? Poirot's eyes did not waver. Non, madam. Truth. The psychology betrays you. The guilty they seek to erase, to silence, to persuade others it is nothing. The innocent cry out, they panic, they despair. But you sought only to control the narrative. And so you revealed yourself. Sylvia looked around wildly. The others stared at her with horror and disbelief. Edward's mouth curled in grim satisfaction, Marian muttered a curse, Clara shook her head, whispering, I cannot believe it. Henry buried his face in his hands. Sylvia's voice cracked. You don't understand. He would have destroyed everything. I worked so hard, and yes, I misused funds. But only to keep the charity alive, to keep people employed. If he exposed me, all would have been lost. I thought no one would ever know. Poirot inclined his head gravely. But one always knows, madam. If not the world, then the conscience. And when the conscience does not suffice, Hercule Poirot does. Sylvia sagged, the fight draining from her. He wasn't supposed to suffer. It was meant to be quick. Graves stepped forward, grim-faced. That's confession enough. Sylvia Crane, you'll come with me. As she was led away, her shoulders bowed, Poirot sat quietly, adjusting the cuffs of his immaculate suit. The remaining friends stared at him in awe. Edward broke the silence first. How did you know? Poirot smiled faintly. It was the psychology, monsieur. Always the psychology. The guilty reveal themselves not in what they say, but in what they deny. Madame Crane denied too much, too soon. That, and the missing napkin, told me all. Clara whispered, so simple, and yet we missed it. Because, Poirot said softly, you looked for the dramatic. A quarrel, a threat, a feud. But crime, she is seldom dramatic. She hides in the quiet word, the little gesture, the smile that conceals fear. It is there, in the smallest detail, that truth resides. He rose, bowing slightly. And so, Miss Amis, the case is closed. George Radcliffe lives, thanks to fortune. But let him beware, sometimes fortune is kinder than man deserves. Still, Hercule Poirot is satisfied. The poisoner is revealed, the little grey cells are content, and justice, she will take her course. With that, he adjusted his moustache, smoothed his sleeve, and walked serenely towards the door, leaving behind a silence filled with relief, sorrow, and awe.